great. So that's a PDF file. Okay, so you included, is this you who did that, or is this oh, cool. Yeah, to share. Oh, good. Well, I'll just have a look at it. That's great. Asia relevant capabilities, adaptability, flexibility, resilience. That's great. So it's easy when I start actually doing this work, and then I suggest it to my students. And when you do a little bit of searching on the web, it's amazing how much actually all of this coincides. It's really good to see. I'm just so happy. I'll just push a little bit further down to see. Sorry for that. Okay, creating curriculum using the Asia priority organizing idea. That's great. Did you actually read it? Have you read it, Miko? Mm, that's great. Yep. So what I will do today, I'll just play with you a little bit. So what we did last week, we looked at this, and that was complicated, right? I don't know how to make it visible for you, but that's okay. We're moving past that a little bit. So what I did today, not past it, but step forward. What I did, I actually tried to, I'll see whether I have it here. I tried to actually create a little bit of a map, Mika. Imagine you don't, imagine, I'll just insert shapes. So imagine you don't see this, okay? Because this is what I was trying, I didn't know in what file I had what. But imagine you don't see that. So that's on the, that's transparent. But basically what I was trying to do today is to have those general capabilities here on the top. Then cross-curriculum priorities on the left. So these are our capabilities. Now, the reason why we are playing, I mean, we're going through this pain a little bit for the first few weeks before we actually go into design, into thinking now more about the designing of a resource. Now you had experience, last semester, and that was brilliant work, but you had experience then, and now we're actually moving to older children, and we also want to design a unit of work, or at least activities, in a way that is more sophisticated and actually better. So this time we're actually, this is 252 units, so we're actually revving it up a little bit. So in order to design a really good unit in LOTE, you want two things. You want children to have a great learning experience, of the students, but also you don't want to commit suicide after 2 years of teaching, right? You need to have fun, really. And I do similar things because all of this is based on my research. I actually designed these tables in order to actually show to students the connections. So when we do this work, it's amazing how much we actually find out what's underneath, what actually can be done, and how this classrooms, LOTE or literacy, how interesting they can be. So Mika, so basically, what we're interested in is you to think first of your LOTE experiences, right? So this is the profile, the e-portfolio, you and your LOTE experiences. So, you can talk about all these things that the assignment asks you to do. But one of the things I was thinking that you could consider as you actually write about your learning experiences is actually to use the curriculum to check how much you do and how much you don't. So in a sense, we will now use those capabilities that we had there. You will see them, I reduced them to basically little sentences here. A little bit here and a little bit here, right? I just made it really small because I remember what I wrote, and you can actually see that you don't have to have so much text. You can just have some points of focus. So basically what we're doing is now thinking how we could actually think of our own LOTE experiences and assess it in relation to the curriculum. So you have done a little bit of work already with that resource, right? You've done some work there already. I'm not sure whether it would be a good idea for me to show it again because it is visible. People are thinking. People are thinking how to, they design these PowerPoint. They design, uh, support concepts for teachers to think how to actually work with all of that. And I do exactly the same. So that's great to see. So I would just, in order not to drag us, because it's different when we do it in classroom, but it's different when we do it online. I'll show you some things that happened. This is what I did something similar in literacy class. Okay, so our students teaching literacy to students in schools. So pre-service teachers. And you will notice here, if you can read, that when I ask students, for example, to come up with some literacy activity, so for you it translates into LOTE activity you do, which you will discuss, or other many, or not, you don't have to do many because it's not enough time for all of that. But when I ask my students in literacy, pre-service teachers in literacy, to discuss to create their own portfolio and discuss or think about their own literacy skills, it's amazing how hard it was. So what happened, very hard, Mika. They came up with this activity, which is I read books to my daughter, and they decided that we will put it here under personal and social because it is about engaging with a child, and maybe it's about community as well, so just put it here. They thought we just put it here. It's about developing a relationship with a child, so we put it here. And it was all right, but then they wanted to identify a different activity, right? They wanted to say, well, I read books, I also do other things, watch television or something. I can't remember what they said. But the point was, what I ask our students in literacy, and the same we're doing in LOTE, is to actually now look into this. So if it is reading a book, right? So you read to your child in Japanese, for example, right? So you read a book to your children. Now, how can we evaluate this activity in relation to the curriculum? And that was a headache, because obviously my students were thinking, well, we're taking an English book, so that has nothing to do with Indigenous people. Obviously, we're doing this to build a relationship with a child, like the student said, to teach them, what did they say here? To educate, to pass knowledge, to entertain. But I asked them, how do you educate children? If we were to look into the capability of ethical and intercultural, right? Intercultural and ethical capabilities, what kind of community are you educating your children into when you just read Anglo-Saxon books, when you do not introduce foreign alphabets, when you don't do all these expansive things? So that was a bit of a problem. I asked also, how do you introduce Asian connection in your English literacy classrooms? And that was a headache. So the idea of using foreign alphabets, of using foreign frames of reference, or even of using Asian books, but in English to to read with children the ways in which Japanese people or Indonesian people construct their own stories and their own ways of living. So I'm showing this to you now. It's a little bit of a lecture today. We will do more of a tutorial next time when I see you, so then you can actually tell me how you worked with your materials and with your website, okay? But today I was thinking we would just have a bit of more of or at least the first 20 minutes more of a lecture. So unfortunately Simon missed it and I can't reply it, but anyway Simon can watch it online. So Mika, when I'm thinking of how we can take this literacy activity, right, which is I read books to my children, how can we evaluate that to get a full-blown, beautiful activity as my pre-service students got it in the literacy classroom, right? After actually we analyzed what would it mean to read a book to a child in Australia, by an Australian parent. What would it mean? After we've analyzed, and this is not finished. So we didn't just analyze the capabilities and not only those priorities, we also went to the curriculum and we looked at the structure. So basically for us, what would be relevant is I show you what I just want to make it visible, this bit, which is the languages. Sorry, I'm not sure whether you can see. It's the languages curriculum, and it has the strand and substrands, right? So we don't have to look at it today, but I'll just put it maybe a little bit down so I can say it. Anyway, I can't do it. All right. So there. So we did it in relation to the actual Australian curriculum for literacy. So we found all these things like language variation in the curriculum. We found things like ethical meaning. We found things like diverse perspectives. We found things like social interaction. There was a lot of things there. And then we were trying to see how we can blow up the idea of reading books, of the meaning of the activity in relation to the curriculum. So priorities, capabilities, and also the structure. It was very interesting, Mika. It was very interesting. And Simon, so what I did for us today, in order to give you, without taking you through an exercise of trying to figure it out yourselves and finding it maybe a bit too much to do on your own, what I did, I took all of that stuff we have here, right? And you have it here, right on the top. So basically these are activities. I didn't actually insert the definition of learning. I just let it go for this little table. So basically what I inserted here is in the personal and social capability, students should contest the understandings in which they frame their participation and also their views of their participants, right? So basically we should have activities that allow them to actually contest what they think. We should do it on a broad basis. I think I didn't actually, so broad range, I didn't put it here for some reason, I don't know why. Broad range. And we should do it also in a way that this broad range allows children to explore what currently seems unfamiliar and explore how they can work with the unfamiliar so they are not scared of the unfamiliar. So they can participate in the unfamiliar, explore it from what they know, and work with they know and contrast it, contest it, and see how they can actually expand what they know in order to adapt to the unfamiliar. So that their view of the community expands, It's no longer this is just one kind of people. Anyway, we've covered that last week. So today I thought to myself, when I was preparing for this class, I thought to myself, well, if we had here an activity, say for example, Yumika or Simone say to me in the portfolio, well, some of the things I do actually in my literacy, LOTE literacy, I read books in Japanese to my daughter, which is, I'm just taking exactly the activity that pre-service teachers proposed in the literacy stream. And basically, I'm thinking to myself of how would that be in your portfolio, say, if you were to create, myself in Japanese. What can I say about myself? What do I do in Japanese? And I was thinking you should consider here the range of resources and what should the range of resources, the image of community that these resources actually are portraying, and also the links you create with different communities, and then I was thinking, okay, so in the range of books, I thought you could actually use here, and we could have a discussion about it. That you might actually come up. What do you think? I just put here things like you should consider the demography of Japan. I don't think Japan is a unitary society. There is no such a thing like unitary society, right? So I think you could consider when you choose books, you want to reflect the Japanese diversity because there is no such a thing like everybody is. I'm sure you have also indigenous people. I think you have different tribes, different areas and so on. So that would be interesting to have stories from different parts of Japan, from different people. Then I also thought if I were to read books, I would also consider things like indigenous stories. Are there some sort of, do you have in Japan, in Indonesia, I know they have, in Malaysia they have, I don't know whether Japan, whether you have an equivalent of indigenous people, do you? Yeah. Yeah, I know them. Yeah. But are they still in Japan or in Russia now? That's it. And it's exciting. Look, if you actually, analyze an activity of how, not just myself in Japanese, but also myself, how can I evaluate my participation in Japanese in relation to the curriculum? Do I, when I read, this is just fiction, right? But if I were to read Japanese books for my children, would I be using those indigenous stories, right? It's interesting because it's not just that we have different lands, different tribes, so-called tribes or different people. We also have that. Would I be reading to them things from ancient Japan, and then maybe compare, how those ancient myths or ancient stories, ancient ways of being, how they transfer to today. It's an eye-opener. Yeah, what did you say? Yeah. So I just thought of that. You probably will think of more, okay? This is not my homework, and my life is on doing PhD problems with my students, but I'm just throwing these in because what's important when we will be designing the resource, we need to have all of this in mind. So you can come up with other ones. Then I was thinking here in terms of community, what range of resources, right? Because we want critical and creative. Just to reinforce, in order to be critical, you need to assemble information, gather. But if we give them just one text, they have nothing to gather from it. So that's why I'm saying to consider more and consider different dimensions of your resources so that they can gather and therefore build understandings on this. And when they can gather a lot, they can play with it. They can be creative. You cannot be playful in an empty room, not for a long time. They found Romanian children in empty rooms hitting their heads against the wall because after a while it becomes a jail. So creativity and critical thinking depend on the range of things we give to students so they can play with those. So community and sustainable living in terms of critical and creative capabilities. I was thinking of, look at ways of living, ways of being. Aboriginal people here in Australia have very different ways of, like, for example, they don't have an uprising against the English, say, call it government or people. Or maybe they did in the past, maybe they just can't. But one of the things that they have a philosophy of going with the current. So you influence the universe with your spirit, not with your fight. So there's a lot of ways of portraying yourself to be in the world. I know also that in Islam, people think that trees and stones have a soul. So I don't know how it's in Japan, and I don't know how these beliefs differ between communities and ages. So indigenous people, ancient Japan, have these beliefs about the universe changed. Yeah, and that's interesting. That's fantastic. If you bring it in, the kids will be, their fingers will be shaking because it's not just about alphabet. There's so many things happening in Japan. So what's the function of stories? People often think, oh, ancient tribes like indigenous people, they have stories because they can't write 8 volumes of Pride and Prejudice. This is such a nonsense. Right. What the stories exactly don't just educate, don't just entertain us. They are what I was saying to students when we were actually then going further here into ethical intercultural. What students will be learning that people use stories to actually organize the chaos around us. People often think, especially Western people think that, say, the field of physics or the field of whatever sciences is the truth, it's the knowledge. We got there where, of the trees, like we're no longer monkeys. This is not true. They are stories. It's just students who don't study the methodology of thinking or the philosophy of inquiry. They think it is all truth. The fact that we have atoms, like atoms, I don't know whether I got it right, atoms, or electrons, they are just stories. They're stories, and they will be abolished one day. We used to think there was only Earth. Now we thought it was solar system. Then we thought it was the galaxy. Now we think it's multiple universes. So the stories are growing. So that's right. So introducing people to different, through those books, you choose the range you have of your text. The range of text you expose children to or students to is about ways of living, ways of being, how you position yourself in the universe. Stories, many stories that have different functions. Use of symbols. Symbols are very important, right? You come into someone's house and you think that you see a key on the wall. It's not a key. Or it's not a moon, right? It's all kinds of things. So, bringing these symbols alive and also compare that we do it in Western culture too. So stories with values, also building dialogic connections, so exploring blogs, exploring how children, I know that there are sites where children or students produce songs in English or in Japanese, poetry. There are Facebook pages to connect students and to connect schools. And especially if you teach in the ages of 16 to 18, they can actually be very active online. They already are. So, exploring those websites and those pages between schools and working. Pechakucha would be fantastic. You need to actually explore Pechakucha. I created the website. I'm trying to continuously, when I talk to people, to engage them in the Pachacucha dialogues. It's really hard to inspire people, but Pachacucha, we might talk about it, in week 3, we will talk about it because it's module 2, right? It's module 2, so we will go there and we'll just talk more about the text and how to create. Anyway, so online presence as well. Have a look what is happening there. Asian connection, it's be good to see text also, which actually, include text. And I'm not saying to do it all in one semester or in one unit of work, but what I'm saying is that's how consideration of a range involves, so that students actually then also learn about connections between people in Japan and in Australia, connections between people in Japan, Australia, and maybe Southeast Asia, because Japan is not. But, I'm sure, so up to you to think about it. I'm running out of steam regarding this issue. But people from Japan live in Australia. They might live in your city. Have a look whether there is a community. Can you introduce those people? Can you ask them to suggest resources? Can you ask them to create things with your students? So that, or to tell you why they are here, all of that. So that kind of connection, that Japan is not only in Japan, it's also in Australia. And there are Australians in Japan, lots of them. So there. So this is just talking about this aspect, right? In relation to something as mundane, as seemingly mundane as reading books to my Japanese book to my daughter, right, in Australia. Question really is, how do we, I'm not saying at home, my pre-service teacher can do what she wants. She can only, but if you were, but very often what happens with teachers, they take activities from home and they think that students at school are also their children, and they do at school what they do at home. So this assignment basically challenges you, and also literacy students, challenges in rethinking what reading books in Japanese actually entails. Nothing is simple. With every activity we do, we shape other people and ourselves. If we do not expand on the way we look at a simple activity of reading a Japanese book, if we do not expand, we become myopic, our students become myopic, our child, thank God, goes to school, so someone will dig her out of that. But yeah, nothing is simple. Reading a Japanese book to my child is not a simple activity, and just using the curriculum allows us to actually see it. So when this basically, when these aspects tell us a little bit about that, I just removed that. I don't know, whatever I had there, but it wasn't really good. I made a mistake. It needs to be corrected. Yeah, that's what I had, but I didn't like it. Anyway, I can do that. Doesn't. I will leave it there. So we have activities here. I just have a look because I crossed out something somewhere. I might have a look. Sorry for that. See, you always, every time I do something, so this students develop an informed understanding of the conversations. Okay. So that's the idea. Students need to learn through the activities that basically everything. How can I put it to you? There was a very famous semiotician, or person who was a language. He was contemporary to Vygotsky. His name was Mikhail Bakhtin. And what he did, he basically said that we live in the sea of conversations. We live in a sea of conversations. And when we interact with people, we pull on those conversations. But because we are all, products of our own environment and experiences, very often we're not aware of the conversation next door. This is exactly why in sciences people now stress cross-disciplinarity. What they say, there is no such a thing like biology. They have to look into physics, they have to look into semiotics, they have to look into mathematics, to geography, right? So we all have to have a look what they talk about next door. So what the critical and creative capability is about is for us, teachers, to reflect on the range of resources we bring with us into the learning environment, to allow our students, or children in this case, to have a look what's happening elsewhere, next door and there and there and in many places. So that the conversations on which they draw become increasingly better informed. Or pardon me, the conversations the conversations on which they draw become plentiful, and they put them together in richer stories. Just like you now. You came in thinking of the activity one way, and now you engage in a conversation with me, and hopefully this will help you to create a richer story in your portfolio. A richer story about your, exactly, a richer story about your LOTE engagements in your portfolio. So I am not quite sure whether these activities are good here. These connections here suggested by my students in literacy, but they were good pointers. What they were saying, if you want to sensitize students now to, if if you want to now help, if so slowly. So ethical interculture is about the image of the community, right? I call it legitimate because depending on the resources you include, which is critical and creative, a different vision of the community will pop out. You present the community differently. So the students were saying, what we need to do is to engage students in forms of activities that enable them, by drawing on those resources here on the right, to develop an understanding that community is diverse, that they can draw on the diversity to create new things. So when they create their website, they might draw on different genres from Japanese culture, from Australian culture, or indeed from the Southeast Asian culture if you introduce some things here. Right? So they draw on this diversity to be creative, not to recreate a story, but to create a story. They might actually create a story in English in your Japanese class by bringing in Japanese elements and to have fun. Create a parody. That's great. We'll think about it in a few weeks, how to implement it. So community is diverse. We need to draw on the diversity because it's not only intelligent, it's also fun. Right? It is all about play, but it's about an intelligent play. We need to expand children's or students' lived experiences, go beyond the singularity of one text. And this is how we were discussing here the indigenous stories, right? They have more than just, they're not just about painting or talking. I mean, my students didn't even know that indigenous paintings are actually stories, but they're stories about the place, events, the so the oral, just like the oral stories we actually translate into writing. They do it into writing, and they also do it into painting. They communicate with this, just like we do. It's just that you and I probably don't do it this frequently because painting and drawing is not so much in the Western culture. It became sort of allocated to a few people who can. Whereas in indigenous culture, for some miraculous reasons, they all can. So we must be missing something in our education because obviously so many of us think we can't. So what other activities here students propose? We create stories in order to, this is what I was talking about before, right? Organize ourselves in the world. The idea that you have to have a shower daily, right? It's a story. You don't have to. Many people live on this, our great parents lived without ever washing themselves in a way that we think of washing today, right? But we've developed the technology of shower, right? To the point we can have a shower any time of the day, and that allows us to organize ourselves in our world. You know, being clean helps you to relax, helps you to feel kind of cleaner, better with people. It does all kinds of things to people. That's why people actually, so we created stories that helped us, stories about even shower and bathing ourselves in order to actually organize ourselves in the world, for the shower to respond to our needs. So we created even greater stories about needs. We had different needs 100 years ago, different needs a million years ago. So basically what in this column we should have is how we can engage students in reflecting about the ethical and intercultural connections they create with the people they will engage with. So if they are if they're reading a book to someone, or if they create a book review for the website, or if they create school website in Japanese, they need to have some resources, which is here, and they need to have activities that encourage them to reflect about the people with whom they communicate. What also needs to happen is as students reflect on who are their interlocutors, their perception of themselves changes. It's no longer, just, do the website, I'll put some symbols from Australia and some words and a couple of maybe characters of Japanese, from Japan, and that would be cool, right? All of a sudden, when we actually develop this intercultural sensitivity, what happens, and also we show them that Japanese people are modern and they have different traditions and they are diverse. All of a sudden, our students want to tap into those stories, because not because they politically correct or because they get a good mark. It's because this will make their website look more richer, more intelligent. They have more tools to include, right? So we gave them the tools and we help them here to play with them. And it's interesting. But what very often happens is because teachers don't give students tools here, all of that, what happens, kids have nothing to play with, so they produce simple things. And remember, every time your student wants to create something amazing in Japanese, but says to you, I don't know how to say it in Japanese, what do you do? Mika, I taught it last semester all the time. So your student wants to create a story in Japanese. Some things you might give them, I'll teach you how. How to, but some things you can't. So what do? Oh, well, what do? They go to Google Translate. Friends, I use Google Translate all the time. I've got students who write about me on Facebook in Indonesian, and I want to know what they say. And I told them I use Google Translate, and that's how I read. They talk to their colleagues in Indonesia. They can't write everything in English because they would reach much less people. But I want to know, because my name is all over it, I want to know how my student is faring, how they are going, whether they feel well. And I also find it quite touching how my students talk about me in their posts. Anyway, none of my business in a sense, but it appears on my wall because they are my friends on my Facebook. So I use Google Translate when I communicate, when I do that. Also, I use Google Translate when I communicate with their professors in Indonesia. I write in English, and they write perfectly good emails to me in Indonesian. So I take these emails, So I take those emails in Indonesian, I put them on Google Translate, and it looks really good. And Google Translate does translate me, my dear brother, but I don't mind because I get it. So Google Translate is not perfect, right? And it's one of those devices. Every time we use it, we might suggest corrections to Google Translate, and it builds its vocabulary. But yeah, Google Translate. Nothing wrong with the device. So what I'm saying is we will be teaching them how to use, and I'll show you how to use authentic resources and how to actually make a, and if you use Google Translate with your students more frequently, then they no longer rely on memorizing Japanese characters. There's room for that too. I'll show you how and so on. But they're not slaves to what they remember. They can go beyond. And when they use Google Translate, they start learning about characters, because Google Translate will pop out characters that they need. So it's kind of very much student-centered, right? This is what they want to know now. How do you say it in Japanese? How do you say it in Japanese? Oh, this is how you say it in Japanese. So the more they engage with no fear, the more they will remember, because this becomes their practice. And they have young brains, they will remember. So you can see, basically what I am suggesting, consider the resources, consider the impact of the range you use, consider activities that allow students to actually grow intercultural and ethical disposition to other people. And as they do, they also no longer look at single dimensionally at their interlocutors, whether this is Australian public for whom they say, even the school, when they want to create for the school a website in Japanese, they no longer see their Australian peers the same way. They see them now in a greater context, that there is a world out there, there are interactions happening, there are stories and symbols. So even not just the Japanese interlocutors they see differently, but also their own peers in Australia, and that's amazing. And as a result, they look at themselves differently. It changes them. And this is a simple story of how to first think critically about oneself in LOTE, and we will translate it in a few weeks of how to use this sort of methodology to design units of work or design complex activities to support language learning. Okay, Simone, if you have any questions, I understand you don't have a microphone, but you can type. Do you have any questions? Are you all right with this? This was a long story. Today we decided we'll just do mainly my talk, and next week we might do something like you could produce and discuss. Just let us know by typing. Mika, would you have any questions as well, or any comments? Oh, we've got this assignment for another 8 weeks. So, I mean, it's not due until end of April. So, that's exactly why it takes 8 weeks for us. Yes, Simon, this will be this what you see here will be on YouTube, will be on Collaborate, because I'm recording it twice actually at the same time, and I put this copy on the in module 1. Okay, it will be called tutorial week 2. It will be called tutorial week 2. You will see it. I'll put it on the announcements. Okay, so nobody will miss it. I'll put it in the announcements. That will be the best. All right. So yeah, so we've got 8 weeks. Well, now it's less because it's week 2, but it was 8 weeks to produce assignment 1, exactly because it is not a simple thing. Working with the curriculum in a correct way to get out of the curriculum all the goodness that it produces, it's actually not a simple thing. But imagine you, yeah. Yes, so that, but yes, exactly. But the assignment 1, what's the assignment 1? I mixed this. I'm teaching so many units. I mixed them. So what's the assignment 1? Yeah, e-portfolio. Yeah, right. So it is e-portfolio, right? So the resource later on will create, as from week 8 onwards, we'll be working on translating all this work into a resource. I will see how we navigate. Whether you will be ready to do your, just so, but basically per plan, um, this is to take 8 weeks for us to actually produce a nice portfolio with links to different resources which are online, different blogs, different Facebook connections, all of that. You're working with adults, they're not children anymore. They actually can vote just about, right? So the adults, you're working with people who actually have already computer literacy, but they do not know the things you do. So we will be, for the next so many weeks that we have until this assignment 1 gets completed, we need to actually we need to better understand how much is involved in the curriculum so that we can create interesting um, interesting learning experiences for our students. But first of all, this assignment 1 is about us analyzing our own LOTE practices using the curriculum so that we can see that nothing is simple. What was supposed to be a simple activity of reading a book to my daughter ended up to be a whole experience. And this is why I like our curriculum, because it doesn't, it gives us this freedom to actually, and gives us all these dimensions. Now, as you are filling up those bits here, right? As you are doing this, do have a look at here, which is the structure of the LOTE curriculum, and just see, am I accounting for this? Am I accounting somewhere for this? And just with the first activity, like the book, reading the book, have a look. It might not actually fit, might not actually, not everything might fit, but just have a look, and then this one, did I consider this? How does this help me to create a better understanding of the reading activity? And that's very different from just a simple way of saying, well, in Japanese, well, when I use my Japanese language, I read books and I write letters, and on Facebook I communicate with my friends from my childhood. I mean, that's not that doesn't require a university uh, unit, or subject to write something like that. So this is quite complex. All right, guys. I'll see you on the discussion board. If you are missing me on this discussion board for some reason or other, just send me an email. Sometimes I get entangled. I've got a few jobs to do here, but so I get entangled somehow in things. But please send me a prompt, and I'll just be there. Okay. All right, friends. I'll see you next week. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.